Welcome to the Behavioral View. Hey everyone, would you like to get a CEU for this episode? Listen closely for the announcement of 3 secret words delivered throughout the episode. Take note of those words and we'll tell you where to go to get your CEU when the show is over. Hi everyone, and welcome to the Behavioral View. I'm Shannon Hill, Editor-in-Chief at the CentralReach Institute, and I'm here with our regular panel, Dr. Carrie Millico, who is Director of Clinical Programming at CR, and Dr. Nissa Van Etten, who is Manager of Assessment and Clinical Training. So, hey guys.
Hi.
Hello.
Show your excitement and enthusiasm for being here, because today you get to be joined by Madi Cerda, who we are very excited to have on the Behavioral View. I asked Madi for a sentence about how to introduce her, and she said that I should describe her as a Mesoamerican Indigenous autist and a BCBA whose passion and career are about mediating between the autistic and ABA communities and advocating for continued improvement in our field. So how did I do, Madi? Did I get it right?
Yes, that is correct, Shannon. Thanks so much for inviting me here today. I'm excited to see where this conversation goes.
So am I. I think we're going to have a really good time. All right. So normally what we do here is we start off with just a question of the day that is just kind of from a list of things that we've thrown out over time as they come to us. We just keep a list and throw them to the guests and give the guests an opportunity to take one of those or give us one of their own. And I got to say, Madi, you gave me one that I had to think about all weekend long. I mean,
Same.
I just moved. I'm an hour and a half away from my old house to new house. I'm driving back and forth, and it's been your question in my head the whole entire time. How am I going to get this down to a nugget that doesn't take up the whole entire episode? So it's a really, really good question. So for our viewers, the question was, instead of asking what you want to be remembered for doing, who do you want to be remembered for being? So, who wants to take that one on first?
Should we let our guest go first, or should we let our guest close it out with a big shebang?
I think we let her close it out with a big shebang.
All right. Well, I tech not it for going first.
All right.
I will go first. That is a difficult one. I think that it's a big question, and who do you want to be remembered for being? I want to be remembered for being honest and always just who I really am. So very authentic and speaking up for myself. And I think I just want people to remember me as someone who is true to my values, whether that be in my professional career or in my personal relationships with them. That's what I just want them to remember when they think about who is Nissa, who is she to me in our interactions and our relationship together.
Yeah. I had some similar thoughts when I was going through this. I also think that this is something that, I don't know, I was going back, does this change over time, or has it been the same all along? Just sort of maturation process, what has that done? And I feel like it has changed over time. I feel like when I was younger, probably I wanted to be things I wasn't. And as I get older and more mature, the goal is to be more comfortable with who I am and to be who I am. So I landed on, I think I strive on a daily basis to be a safety zone for the people in my life. So I would like to hear eventually, if I get to listen in on my own eulogy, that people felt like I was someone that they could come to be with, whatever, regardless of whether we saw things the same way, or if they needed to tell me something that they thought I wouldn't want to hear, that they still felt comfortable doing so, and that I'm a place where you can be uncomfortable and still be accepted. Because I feel like I'm uncomfortable all the time. So I can empathize with that. What about you, Carrie?
Well, this is hard because I feel like my whole life has been about doing. I'm reading a leadership book, and there was something in that book that really resonated with me, is that like women try to gain traction in their profession by like doing more than men, so that way that they can like help bridge that gap. And I was like, oh yeah, gosh, that is so me. Like I do, so much more. Well, I don't know so much more, but I find myself doing a lot. So I had to think about this of like not so much what I'm producing, but who I want to be. And I define this, I know who I want to be when I'm like 60 or 70. I have some like characters I want to align myself with, like Grandma Tyrell from Game of Thrones, or even like a Sophia from Golden Girls, like that lady who just doesn't give up, and she'll just go to say it. Maybe it's the honesty thing so that you're getting at, but right now, if I would die right now, I would want people to think of me as thoughtful, and I really hope that I am present. So those two things, like thoughtful and like deep consideration around issues and topics, and thoughtful at my job, but also thoughtful with respect to caring and considerate, remembering people, even if it's just like a birthday, going out of my way to make someone feel special and loved, and present in that, because I'm doing so many things. I don't want my children to look back and think, I wish she was here. Like I want to be there. So those are my two things.
Can I just throw out there, I think you are on track for being Sophia. I can see you at 60, 70 being Sophia.
Yeah,
sure.
Right? I just think that I would have the best time doing that. I don't think I can get away with it now. I'm taking little steps to get there. But, when I'm not in a job and I just have grandkids, and I'm like, yeah,
just
unfiltered.
let it out.
All right, Madi.
Well, I loved all of your responses, and I love that it was a challenge, because that question is really to help bring about this awareness that so much of who we are is connected to what we do. And when you start to live that kind of life, it's very hard to ever be satiated, if that makes sense. Like you have to go on to the next thing to do, and you never really feel fulfilled. And so Carrie actually took mine, which is to be present, and just the state of being, and how sometimes just being may not have any descriptive words, right? To just be, and not have that connected to some sort of performance or product. I think it's really important, because it's those spaces that we sometimes really avoid placing ourselves in, right? It's like, oh, I need to find something to do, to busy myself so I don't have to sit and just be, and really know who I am in those moments of space where there is nothing to occupy, my thoughts and my emotions, and all those private events that I know sometimes we can say, shoo away. But I think it's just such a difference in my own work, especially pulling around like Indigenous research methods and pulling this type of, perspective into the work that we're doing. So I really love to always hear what people say when I ask that question. So thank you for your wonderful answers.
Part of the reason that the question was so good is that I think it's very interrelated with what our topics here today are. And, it was kind of a personal soul-searching journey to ask that question. So let's just launch right in with personal questions and continue on with that. Madi, the first thing that was kind of on my mind to ask you is, given all of the descriptors that you use to describe yourself, it sounds like, you have several personal identities that are kind of in conflict with each other right now if you separate those out. And I'm just curious, how you doing? What's that like to be experiencing all of that right now?
If I don't utilize the strengths of my neurology to compartmentalize, I think it would probably be driving me a little bit batty right now. But you're very right. I do have multiple intersections, and identities that really sometimes can collide, especially the autism and the behavior analysis and the indigenous, and it's sometimes it fits beautifully and sometimes they just crash into each other. So I really have to be careful to compartmentalize what I'm doing when I'm doing it, and being present, right, for that specific thing, and then letting it go. Otherwise, it can become very overwhelming.
Yeah, I think we probably all experience some degree of conflict right now. For me, particularly regarding social media, being able to compartmentalize that and to move on. I think one of the things that I did a couple of years ago was to create a course for behavior analysts on how do you use social media, what are the ethics of that. And the reason for creating that, I think, is it was my own struggle with seeing some things that were playing out, like people using social media for things that we used to use the literature for things that we used to reach out to other people, to experts or to peers for, and now we're turning to social media to talk about these things. And it seems very hard to compartmentalize some of that sometimes for me.
Yeah. Well, and I think, we chatted a little bit about this when you and I first, were planning this interview. And I think the most difficult part is it's such a false construct, the social media world. It's not real, so to speak. And I think the best way that I can, help people go have an aha is like the struggles that, you're talking about, and the struggles that other even neurotypical individuals talk about with social media. That's what it feels like as an autistic person trying to navigate a social construct, that the rules are very fluid. The rules can change at any moment. And, you could still follow the rules and get into trouble, so to speak. So, I think social media is a beast. And there's many times where I'm like, you know what, this is this screen that I'm staring at and all these interactions. I have to remember, like, this is not my reality. This is not my life. And, the moment I shut those things down and I look around me and I'm present, that helps to center who I am and remind me of my values, because I think a social media platform and this kind of false construct can really, it's almost like a maze. You can like lose who you are and your values. And it's like a this place with no compass, right? Like no true north to help you remember, like, why am I here and what am I doing?
I too struggle with that, and my social media behavior has changed recently. I think we even just talked a little bit about that on social media. But I think that, I will join in on a conversation when it's not necessarily to change the mind of the original post, if that is, I think, troublesome, but it's more to enlighten the readers of the thread who are looking at that conversation as an educational opportunity, because many do. And so I don't want them to like think that thing is just everyone's accepts that whatever position is. And I would like to add in clarity. The times that struggle with me is that because often I won't step in until my heart is really in it. And then I become attached, and then I start going in the back and forth, which then it consumes me. And then even if I leave the conversation, it consumes the rest of my day. which is really hard because, you know, one, I'm going like, oh, gosh, you know, I went back and forth with someone who's, you know, was likely inflexible or something like that, and I'm sure I was being that way too. But then at the same time, I couldn't just say my piece and walk away, because I come in a little parental, thinking like, oh, this is an educational opportunity and I need to, you know, provide points to this, you know, the counter argument. And so I have to do a lot of work after that, be like, okay, you know, as my therapist would say, put it in the container, go to your happy place, you know, practice some of your mantras. So it's just like, I don't know, at times where I want to get involved with that when I go through and I see the list, and I'm like, is this a hill in which you have to do all those things, like you are going to die on, or is this just a thing? And so I find myself deleting more often than not, which is for my own personal health. But I don't know, I find it's hard to balance that, you know, that teaching opportunity and then getting sucked into the negativity.
Secret word number 1, bilingual.
I think, you know, I see social media at 2 points. One, it's a nice way to connect and to keep up to date with what people are. And for my personal life, I've lived in many places, so it's a nice way to keep connected with those individuals. But then when I look at it in the professional realm, and I've done exactly what you're saying, Carrie, where I've drafted this long post because I'm so passionate about something that's come up. And I've said, okay, what is this going to do if I post this? Will this be educational? Is this supportive? Is this argumentative? And sometimes I just keep it on my phone and I reflect on it by reading what other people are posting. And then if I see a post where I feel like, you know what, I really do want to add here, but I don't want to add something that's going to be a little chaotic and cause people to get upset, I might use more of references. So I'll use kind of the literature to say, hey, here's what I've read that could help inform you. Obviously, make your own decision and your own judgment. But if I'm going to jump into a conversation, I'm super careful because, like we're all saying here, a lot of it can be misconstrued. It is a highlight reel if you're looking at it from the personal perspective. And then from the professional perspective, we have a large majority of behavior analysts who are newly certified, where that is where they're consuming a lot of their education, their interaction, their professional, you know, expert seeking. They're looking for opinions, and it can be helpful to connect us all, but it's also kind of scary because it can lead down a different path.
Mm-hmm. So in Indigenous research methods, there is something known as storying or storytelling. And it's essentially like the qualitative aspect of, you know, figuring out a client and a family's story, so to speak. I'm really excited because I'm going to be presenting on this with Dr. Patricia Wright and Dr. Tyra Sellers at WEBA in July. But just to kind of give you a little taste of what we're going to be talking about, this whole idea behind storying or storytelling is providing space for these families to share more than just what you have on your intake form, right? More than just like this kind of quantitative, like, you know, rubric of information that we all know we have to get to do this assessment and all this fun stuff. It's really the shading and the coloring of creating this picture of who it is that we're working with. But one of the really important things in storytelling, and I'll come back to like the Facebook and the social media stuff, like it's connected to this, is that when people are sharing this story, it's critical for us as the listeners to maintain the boundary that we have not been asked to be a character in this story. And therefore, whatever opinions or whatever rebuttals or anything, really, we have not been granted the permission to become a character in that story. And so I think about that, like with all these Facebook posts, you know, people are sharing their story, whether it's accurate, whether it's right. And I think it's so important for me, for my own kind of well-being, to remember I have not been asked to be a character in this story. And so it saves me a lot of stress, because I'm like you, Carrie. I'll like go back and like, oh my gosh, I should have said this, or oh, I can't believe I went round and round. And just remembering, like, this is someone on a platform being able to share their story, their lived experience. And just because it's not mine or yours or the 50 other people that are commenting on it, doesn't mean it's not valid for them in their life. And I think that's just such an important thing that we remember. Like, I haven't been asked to play a part in this. I haven't been asked to be a character. And so when you're just an observer or the person reading the story, you don't get to interject your part of the story into it. And I think for me, that's a huge piece that I hope a lot of our new analysts and just people in general that are kind of navigating these worlds can remember, for their own peace of mind.
I think that
Such
what
a
you're saying,
great
sorry, I think what you're saying has such broad applications to everything in behavior analysis. And I'm probably saying that because I started out as an English major, and I went from there to psychology, and sort of like eventually ran my way through professionally into behavior analysis. But I often told people that I learned as much about human beings being an English major as I did being a psychology major, and certainly as a behavior analyst. Because I do think that one of the things that is problematic about behavior analysis today is zooming in with a hypothesis and testing that hypothesis instead of coming in with a question and asking the question. So even like ABC analysis, whenever I have students, I teach them the way I do it, and then I teach them the way to do it for the test. Because for me, ABC analysis is you go in and you write down all behaviors, not the target behaviors, because you learn as much from when things aren't happening as when they are happening, and you get to sample those skills that are happening. And so whenever if we bring everything back to this whole social media and standing up for each other and being there and listening, there's so much that goes into what happened in that person's life right before they wrote that post, what's happening in my life right now when I'm ready to respond to that post, or to someone who is saying something to me that I don't like right now. And when I bring it back to my desire to be the safe zone, I feel like I'm constantly monitoring myself of do I have anything interesting to say right now, and do I have any rights to say it. And now I also feel, to be honest, a little bit paranoid and anxious, Madi, about the fact that I don't tend to fall into any protected categories except that I'm female. And I never want to be perceived as pushing in or as speaking for people, but I also don't want to be perceived as not speaking up for people. So for me, navigating that is very difficult. And if you can tell me how to do it, I will write it down and do it.
Gosh, I wish there was an easy like task analysis for that to write up, because even in advocacy and allyship, those that genuinely want to do those things, you will still run into, non-dominant, multi-intersectioned individuals who will not be receptive to it in the manner that you try to deliver it, if that makes sense. So in other words, you're not going to make everybody happy with the way that you demonstrate your allyship or the way that you advocate. And that's something that is really interesting, just living kind of in that like autistic community in that world, is seeing like all of these different advocates and getting along with some, and others want nothing to do with me, and recognizing we're not a monolith. And so, when people have a genuine passion to want to be an ally and be an accomplice, the only thing I can really encourage is you're going to run into opposition, because there's just some people that aren't ready for the way you're wanting to do that, or will not accept the way you're wanting to do that. But don't be discouraged, because there will be others, that will say thank you we see that you are truly genuine and authentic in wanting to do this. Because I have other advocates that are like, you're a behavior analyst, so you're a trader in every other thing. And I'm like, okay, let me turn in all my cards for every other thing that I am. And some people are very deeply wounded. And so, I have to respect that and know that that's not a reflection of me.
I think that these are great pieces of wisdom for, as in your introduction, Shannon talked about how you mediate between the worlds of ABA and the autistic community. And I think, what you said, especially about no one invited you to be a character in that story, I think is really profound advice for behavior analysts when seeing a post written from an autistic person sharing their experience in a sense. And even if it's not like, there's different ways people can go about doing it, as opposed to like replying directly to that post or making like a shady post, but it's on their own wall, but it's talking about that one thing. And it's just like, that gets a little gross too. I've seen that a number of times. And it's just like, there are so many things that are contributing to that person in their world that you have no access to. I remember one autistic advocate even talking about, and we won't dive into this, but it was talking about facilitated communication and this and while this autistic advocate communicates not that way, but they were just saying like, it's not for you to chime in and tell them you are wrong, or if someone is saying that, because like in my metaphor that I give is just like, if I had cancer and I choose to heal myself through crystals, with not saying that they're the same thing, but maybe it's not proven in science or something like that, that is not for anyone else to come in and tell me that I do it. I have my own reasons for doing that. I wanted to do crystals, for a particular reason and go down that path. And even though my cancer doctor, there's a real name for that, but he may have said, hey, there's not a lot of good research and backing to this. I don't think that like that would be a good option for you. He still has to respect my choice as a human and as his patient. And for me, he's like, okay, well, I still want to make sure that, you're good. So check in with me if you need anything, but okay, you can go down that path. Like, it is not for us to jump in there and to get really nasty and ugly. I think that shows up in a really negative way that then makes autistic advocates, like you said, who say, oh, you're a behavior analyst, you got to turn in all your cards. Like, that's what they see, right? So we have to understand that perspective as well.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. If you look at the history of psychology, we were, shoving spikes up people's noses to do some lobotomies, just scrambling stuff around. And that was considered, top tier medicine at one point. And, we never know what is going to become research-based or evidence-based until we start actually trying new stuff. And that's the whole beauty of science is, okay, you have a lot of people that are talking about X, Y, and Z. We have some preliminary historical stuff that talks about X, Y, Z, but now we have new technology where we can like look at eye gaze and do a little bit deeper research. Maybe we should listen to this community and see how we can support. And as scientists, we should be very objective in, I'm not doing this to prove you wrong. I just want to see what the science shows, right? What the research is going to show with new technology, with new advancements. Maybe we realize, hey, there is something to this XYZ, and we just didn't have the technology in the beginning, right? I mean, I think it's kind of funny that we have a lot of people in the field that demonstrate some of these inflexible and rigid behaviors that we're supposedly targeting. in the work that
right,
we're
with our
doing.
learners, right? We teach our learners to be flexible, and yet we but I think that goes to what Shannon was saying about like recipe testing, right? As opposed to just being curious, right? Let me use my science to explore a question, like a very open-ended question, not a question that results in a yes or no, right? Like I'm going to just be curious about this thing, as opposed to being like, I need confirmation.
Secret word number 2, construct.
Well, and not only that, but that if we are scientists, we have to have this position of philosophic doubt all the time. So we should never be 100% convinced of the truth of our science. We are always supposed to be assuming that we have something wrong and that we want to keep testing it and we want to keep growing in that. And I do think that that's one of the ways that ABA is definitely sabotaging itself. I love Skinner. I have all of his books. I haven't put them behind me yet, but they are there. But he did never, I do not think Skinner ever meant for us to stop with Skinner. I really don't. I think that he wanted us to keep exploring and discovering what else we can do with behavior analysis and what things we were wrong about. And maybe not even wrong. Maybe that there are more than one, maybe there is more than one way to get to that ends that we're trying to get to. And some are a little bit more preferable to some people than others.
Or like Madi said,
right?
like we didn't have the technology, or we weren't prepared as a field. We needed more tools and resources and stuff like that to actually get to where we need to be, today.
Mm-hmm. Well, and we as a field kind of failed to do one of the things that we're taught to do with Skinner and, some of the other founding fathers, and that's just to do an ecological audit of the social political climate of Skinner's time. From the 30s to the 60s, like let's talk about what was happening in the world.
Women didn't have bank accounts. That's for sure.
Skinner was, woman could not get a mortgage. That's for sure. Couldn't open up a bank account, couldn't do anything. So, I mean, what was life like for women? What was life like for minorities and disabled individuals? And yet Skinner wrote Utopia, or Walden too, and this concept of utopia from that social political context. All those things that right now, if we were to say in the medical world, we're going to practice from this historical context where you had to, open you from left to right all the way to get your appendix out. We don't have to do this like laparoscopic, yeah, it's there, but we're just going to use the old school way. And so we're practicing from historical context if we don't sit here and actually have this audit of, okay, what was life like? And what was this utopia that was influencing, Skinner's perception of what that would be like? And plus, World War II, he was very much influenced by that and trying to figure out a way to make human beings get along and not destroy each other. So that's going to heavily influence the way that you perceive the world around you. But that may not be relevant now. And I think some people are just so rigid that it's almost like blasphemous to say like Skinner did great, but we got to go to the next 20 steps now. Like we can't stay here.
Yeah, my professor, Linda Hayes from UNR, was very much about how do we evolve. I mean, and Steve as well, right? From that purple RFT book, man. So we're thank you, Skinner, for giving us this. And now let's move forward. How do we talk about these more sophisticated, complex behaviors? We have to.
Yeah, it's impossible. Yeah, I don't know. I keep going to ACT as we talk. So many of the things that we have been talking about bring up ACT in some kind of way, ACT and RFT, right? So can our science absorb relational frame theory? Can we extend into complex behaviors? And if we can't, what is the value if our science can only handle, simpler forms of behavior? But also just that whole, what we were talking about, taking care of ourselves and knowing when to act and when to not, and when to avoid and when to let go. So I don't know. It's just interesting to me that theme is there.
Well, because all the stuff that we want to talk about is about complex behaviors, and that's like the fun, meaty stuff, as opposed to like, let's just talk about the echoic. No one's going to want to watch a podcast about that.
Well, and I think one of the kind of, I don't want to say maybe the deficits in our field is that we want to talk about these complex behaviors, but with the outcome being that we know the answer at the end of the day, as opposed to being okay with when we talk about these complex things and these behaviors and these, all of these things, we may just end the day with more questions for tomorrow, and being okay with that and knowing that we may go like 30 years and not have any more answers, but we have about 100 more questions, which is growth. But I'm afraid that right now we have a field that is very much about, we have to know the answer and we have to be the ones that have the answer. Otherwise we're a failure. And it's like, that's not what science is at all.
Yeah, for sure. And that maps to just daily activities. Like I know my team of instructional designers, we were even on a call today, and I was like, okay, I said, do this task. This is our next project. And it was like, oh no, we started talking about it and we got in the weeds. We need to have a little brainstorm session before we figure it out. And it was like, oh yeah, no, once we get into it, there's like 6 more projects. We thought it was 1 project, but it's actually 6. So, but I think, like you said, that's inevitable, because then that what you're chasing after is something valid and true and thoughtful, and, as opposed to being really superficial that probably wouldn't suffice to fully answer that question.
Yeah. And I think also there is a dash of humility that I think we need collectively. We're talking about ACT and RFT, but at the same time, I always find myself saying, there's nothing new under the sun. There's nothing new. And I don't know if anybody's ever heard of Morita therapy, but it came to existence in the 1800s. And this is I think it's Japanese. Shoma Morita was the individual who came up with it, but it was basically like the whole premise of it is to have the client accept their life the way it is. And, you really can't change it. So let's move towards acceptance. And when, I was researching about Morita therapy, I'm like, oh, wow, this is ACT. Like, this is just another name. But, I think it's critical that we recognize that there's really nothing new under the sun. And, for me, part of embracing Indigenous work and Indigenous culture is not needing the credit for something. Like, I'm not going to create anything new. I may unearth something that has been lost or forgotten. But, I think that's part of the humility is like whatever I find or figure out has probably already been found before. But how do I apply it to this timeline, to this context, and to this life that is happening right now?
And not even just through psychology. Because it's funny that you say that. I've been reading my way through Agatha Christie, and I keep getting struck by what a student of human behavior Agatha Christie was and how aligned she was with ACT. I challenge you to read it and see if I'm not telling the truth.
When I was pregnant, and I did a lot of lessons. So instead of, oh gosh, there was this one method I forgot that was very popular, but I did what was called hypnobabies. And it was a way to which you could calm your body on a cue in order to ride through the contractions. But actually I couldn't do that. I calmed my body after the contractions. I had to be very focused during the contractions, but I did a lot of that. And I found a lot of similarities with that as well. And I even called my friend who was pregnant at the same time. I was like, oh girl, we got to talk. We never did it, but yeah, I mean, it's funny how you can dive into different areas. And when I say there was no hypnosis, it was just training your body on signal.
It's just the fact that you feel like you need to apologize and clarify is another way.
Well, and I talked about like how ABA, the climate and temperature is. Like if you are not, then yeah, then someone's going to make they're going to vague post about you.
Absolutely. And I think a really good behavior analyst can find a parallel everywhere because you're analyzing it in terms of behavior analysis, right?
Yeah, no, I've had a few vague IG posts towards some of my stuff, and I've been advocating and kind of posting and sharing my thoughts for, oh my gosh, 2 years now. And I finally had my first like really hateful message from another behavior analyst that was like, you are such a bully and you're all these B words. And I was like, oh, okay, well, thanks. I mean, I don't know what you want me to say. You're not inviting me to be a character in your story, and I really don't want to be a character in your story. So I'll just let that sit there. But yeah, I mean, you can't, that's something that I'm hoping will be part of this, movement. I really feel like we are at a crossroads right now, and it's a wonderfully scary time to be in this field because we can potentially go one of two directions. And my hope is that we become a field that is very much compassionate and accepting that I can bring my culture, and my beliefs, and this two-eyed viewing is what it's called. And I won't share too much more about that. If anybody wants to go research it, they can. But about embracing Western and Indigenous ways, because that's really the only way we're going to move forward. We live in a very high technology advanced society, but if we leave behind who we are and who we began as, we're going to lose that compass. And I think, kind of what we were talking about with Instagram and Facebook and social media, like there is no compass in those places. And so if we're not very careful and staying connected to who we are, there is that risk of losing sight of who we are and what our values are.
I read something a while ago. It was an article about rediscovering shaping in behavior analysis. And so the title of it was something like, why we don't use shaping in behavior analysis anymore. I'm like, what? We're constantly, you can't not use shaping. Shaping is happening all the time. But I got to say, Marty, when you said be compassionate, I had an emotional reaction. I felt my heart sink a little bit. I felt sad because I do feel like we're giving a lot of attention to compassion towards our clients, but we are not giving much attention towards compassion towards each other. And that really bothers me for a group of people who believe that we shape towards the behavior that we want, or a better tomorrow anyway, that we're supposed to be shaping. Why are we using so much punishment on each other? Go ahead. I want to hear the
answer. I mean, you have to look at the way our ethics code is written and the way that, our entire kind of certification and all of it, it's very much punishment based. I don't see a lot of like reinforcing things out there for us to want to be compassionate towards each other. I mean, I think the way that the framework in which it's been set up has made it to where it's very cutthroat. And what you let someone, do this, like, oh, I'm going to go file a report against you. And what, so it's been an environment that's been made to be very conducive to wanting to tattle on each other, for lack of a better word, as opposed to, being able to feel safe and saying like, hey, I don't know how to do this. Yes, I have my license. Yes, I'm certified. I passed the test, but I still really don't know how to do this well. Can I reach out to somebody without feeling like someone's, going to call the ABA police on you? Like it's, and that's really why I started LEAP, was because I recognized that this starts at like the supervision side of it. It's almost like hazing, it reminds me of like fraternity and sorority stuff. Like I suffered through it. I never knew if I was going to get my stuff signed. You're going to do the same thing. You're going to live through that too, that, you're going to suffer just as much as I did. I'm like, well, that's really healthy for developing a compassionate field. And so, when we started LEAP a year ago, it's like, no, the supervision relationship is the most critical one, because it's like that parent relationship, that supervisee is never going to know how to be a compassionate practitioner if they don't experience that from their supervisor. And I think that's been kind of a consensus that I've heard quite a bit when speaking with students and those trying to get into the field.
I also think, when we think about compassionate behavior analysts and how we're moving that needle with how we support clients, that's still very much in early stages. We're still trying to understand how do we interact with families, and like Mari is mentioning, listen to their stories. I think that's, we're going in with very minimal time to even listen to that story. And, with that minimal time, we've got an agenda with questions we need answered. So really understanding what is compassionate behavior with clients, and then with each other, and then with ourselves. When I'm working with a client and my intervention fails, I can't go home and completely, fall apart. I have to continue to understand, okay, I made a mistake. I'm human. I'm going to go back to the evidence and try and find something new. So I think there are many ways that we can look at being compassionate, not only to ourselves and our clients, but to each other, in understanding we are trying to deal with very sophisticated, complex individuals. We've got a lot of competing contingencies in whatever space we're working in, education or in the clinical world. And we've got to be able to be okay navigating all of those worlds for ourselves and for our clients, and then for our colleagues. I mean, there are so many ways to look at all three. And how do we model that compassionate behavior in supervision, in our interactions with our consumers, and then when we have thoughtful conversations with colleagues, disagreeing, because that is kind of where we are, where there's a lot of disagreement happening. And it's something that we need to learn to say, I don't agree with your statement, but I want to have a very open conversation with you and hear your side in this disagreement. I think there's a lot we can continue to learn.
And Nissa, you hit a really important point that we're actually in that workshop at WEBA going to be talking about, which is, what is your story as a behavior analyst? We're talking about like learning how to listen to the story of our clients. But again, going back to even that first question that I asked of who do you want to be remembered as being, as behavior analysts, what got us to where we are today? What's my story? Why am I doing what I'm doing? And I'm talking about digging deep, not just because you passed the exam, not just because you had a 4.0, GPA, not just because you all of these like kind of quantitative things. What is your story, and why are you here? And how does that impact your character in the story of your clients, right? And I think we're not going to fully understand how to be compassionate if we don't practice that with ourselves. And we won't be able to practice that with ourselves if we are not still and present enough to hear our own story. And so many times we try to cover it up with all of these things that we have done, and that's not who we are.
One of the things that I really have appreciated lately from working at CentralReach is how many times, I appreciate it, and it's a sign of worry at the same time about the larger world. How many times I've been in meetings recently where someone has said, this is a safe place, right? Because we're branching off into groups and having conversations about various things, and they're big picture ideas in many cases. And sometimes it's a really small thing that you need to be able to say that you did wrong or you disagree about or whatever. And sometimes it's huge. And I feel like creating these small communities where we're safe to say it and safe to hear it and know that we can be forgiven for not being a perfect behavior analyst is one way that we shape towards getting that in larger communities. So I just want to say thank you to my coworkers for providing me with that. So I do want to start kind of winding us down, but I want to be sensitive to the amount of time that we've asked you for, Mari. But you did mention LEAP. You want to tell us a little bit more about what LEAP is?
So yeah, sure. LEAP is a nonprofit. It stands for the Lighthouse of Equitable Access and Practices. And really it focused on that relationship of the supervision piece that I was mentioning earlier, and how that really has been neglected in our field is cultivating these really healthy relationships between a supervisor and a supervisee. And one of the things that we found when we kind of started the needs assessment, when we first started this, was the financial piece. It can be so expensive to get the supervision that you need. And, when the BACB released those demographics, I wasn't surprised, to see the disparity of diverse practitioners, but it was still really disappointing. And so I just wanted to focus on how do we remove barriers for non-dominant, multiply intersectioned individuals, not just women, but, LGBTQIA, neurodivergent individuals, Indigenous, Black, Hispanic, all, Asian Pacific Islander, making sure that these individuals were provided equitable access to getting into the field. Because if we really want to address some of these areas that we were talking about earlier, we have to have diverse practitioners. We have increasingly diverse clients, and part of being compassionate is being able to understand when we can, by having diverse practitioners that know the culture of their clients and the families, but also just being able to accept without always understanding. When you work with diverse groups and you are surrounded with diverse professionals, you're much more likely to be accepting, even though you don't always understand, the story that is very much shaded by culture, by, ethnicity, gender, socioeconomic status, all of these different variables that I think we sometimes forget play a huge part in someone's story.
Sorry, go.
So LEAP is, yeah, no, I was just going to say, so LEAP is, we have two cohorts. We had a cohort that started the very first year that we actually started the organization, and we had added a second cohort, and our first cohort is getting ready to test. And this was free supervision. We started out with 9 in the first cohort. 2 of them have tested and passed, and I believe we have 3 or 4 in the second cohort. And then this summer, we will be opening up our scholarship round, and we will be providing 4 $1,500 scholarships for non-dominant, multi-intersectioned students that are wanting to come into the field. And so we're really excited about that.
Discussion about diversity. There's a book that I was reading, and it talks about some research, how diversity in a field or in a company or something like that also leads to innovation and creativity. So when you have everyone, or with these varying experiences and life histories and different cultures that come to play in a singular field or a singular workplace and stuff like that, it actually benefits the field or company so much more than when it is all looking like one thing. And given what we were talking about earlier, that's exactly what our field needs. If we are stuck in this pattern of research that is unable to get creative and move our field forward in a significant, meaningful way to more complex human behavior, we need creativity. We need innovation. We need that. And I think that we've seen that as of late a little bit with some special editions that are focusing on stuff that open up behavior analysis into different segments that we've never touched before. And it is because of the diverse people who are doing that research. So I think it's only in our favor if we move that way.
Secret word number 3, search.
Absolutely. And I think that we're at that cusp, and, that kind of growth can be painful. And, it requires individuals to recognize that, oh, this stage is larger than what I thought it was. Let me scoot over and make some room. And I think that can be a very, very painful task for some individuals who have been very much accustomed to that not being the situation. And so I feel like we're kind of at this point where, okay, what's going to happen next?
And we will, I'll get some information from you about LEAP, and we'll drop some links and get you guys inundated for that scholarship application, hopefully.
So
Awesome.
So, and you're going to be speaking at WEBA?
I will be speaking at WEBA with Dr. Patricia Wright, Dr. Tyra Sellers. They reached out and asked me if I would join them.
Would. That sounds like a great opportunity.
No. When those powerhouses email, you're like, oh, that's the top of my list. So they have been so gracious. I'm really excited about what we're bringing to WEBA. I think
now,
people
are
will be
you
ready.
doing any more recording on your podcast, the Supervisor Soapbox?
It's so funny that you asked that. My husband asked me that at lunch today. He's like, so when are you going to record your next episode? I'm like,
I know you've had a lot on your
can I
plate,
just, like,
but I love that podcast.
Yes, we actually are lining up guests for the next few months. So we're, behind the scenes, we're preparing for the next round of it. I'm just trying to and then in January, I opened up a center. So that's been like overwhelming. So yeah, I'm just, trying to juggle all these plates that I keep adding. And my husband's like, please don't add one more thing. I'm like, it's fine. It'll be fine. So we will be having a season 2, so to speak. We're lining up some speakers right now, but yes, that will continue.
I love it. Well, Carrie, Nissa, anything new coming up for you guys?
Nothing too much. By the time this airs, ABI would already have occurred, and so I'm doing a talk there. But on the LMS is an instructional design talk that Dr. Tim Fuller and Kristen Smith and I gave at CalABA. So people can access that there if they were not at CalABA, or if they were and were unable to see it and have interest in instructional design.
And I saw that talk and it's great. I loved it. I took so many notes. It was so enlightening and interactive, and I loved it.
I appreciate that.
I also wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't say, but you're presenting.
Well, yeah, no, I said that, but my first thing, but I'm thinking that
is there anything coming to the Is there anything coming to the LMS?
Well, we also may repurpose that talk for another conference, because we're presenting Monday morning and no one's going to attend Monday morning. So, but yes, eventually that talk will go on there as well. This is the first time we've talked about this.
And that's how I get content for the LMS. I embarrass people.
It's the first time we're giving this talk, so we may want to let it evolve a little bit before we, do a permanent product somewhere. So.
And then I am working on the assessment mentoring cohort. So we are on Thursdays. We're moving it to 1 p.m. Central. And the next series for the cohort will be case examples on assessment, kind of bringing in different case experiences and how to make decisions on which assessment to select, which goals to select, all different examples that our last cohort brought in terms of experiences they wanted to have with the ABLES-R and the AFLs.
Well, I guess my only new thing that will have happened when this launches is ABI will have happened, and we will have announced that CentralReach Institute now has a test prep solution available for people preparing to sit for the BCBA exam, and that's going to have 3 steps. It's going to have SAFMEDs for study. It's going to have mock exams, and then from your mock exam results, it links you back to content for whatever areas you need more study on. So we are really excited about that. We've been working on
that's
it
a huge project.
Year.
It's like giving birth to a baby. Yes. That thing.
We're really. Yeah. Well, that might have been triplets. But thank you guys. Thank you, Madi, so much for joining us. I love this conversation. We could have talked on for quite a while. We didn't even get through our whole conversation map, which I knew we would not. So we may want to hear
Yeah,
more
Maddie's
from
one of my
you
favorite
later.
people. So anytime we can bring her back, that may always make me happy.
Absolutely.
I would love to come back and chat with you all. It was a very nice conversation that I agree could have gone on for quite a bit longer.
Thanks everyone for joining us.
Thanks for watching this episode of The Behavioral View. To get your CEU, follow the link in the instructions below. You can then go to the attendance verification quiz where you'll enter in the secret words and pay the CEU fee to generate your certificate. If you've already done the work, you may as well get the credit.